Family. Thanks for joining me once again. It's been a minute, hasn't it? It's been a minute. It's time for us to go one on one once again. And in case you're wondering, my name is Titilayo Oyinsan. Today we have a really interesting conversation. Now, it's all about taxation. Now, this is not something people often want to discuss, but it actually has a huge impact on the economy and the average man that some may not have realized. Taxation is the only practical means of raising the revenue to finance government spending on goods and services that most of us demand from our government. Setting up an efficient and fair tax system is far from simple, particularly for developing countries that want to become integrated with the international economy. This is One on One. My name is Titilayo Oyinsan, and in just a moment, we'll be having a conversation with Dr. Martin. Now, just in case you don't understand the angle I'm coming from, just know that taxation can have important effects on many parts of the economy, not just what I made reference to earlier. And today we're going to be specifically looking at the impact of its changes on business profitability and citizens' welfare. How can it be measured? How can it be handled? And to discuss with us today, we have Professor of Economics, Martin Ike-Muonso. It's great to have you with us, Dr. Martin.
Thank you so much, Titilayo. Thank you for having me.
And now, I'm wondering how your conversations usually start when you begin to discuss the issue of taxation, especially with your background. To a layman that you just met, how would you explain what taxation actually is?
Well, I think to every layman kind of knows what taxes mean. They know that it is something, that kind of payment that the government demands from you, regardless of whether you want to pay or not. So you don't have a say in it to some extent. Some policymakers sit down and agree on what the rates should be, what assets to tax, and basically they impose it upon you. If you have a considerate legislature, they may be able to debate it in your favor, to your favor. If you also have the executive arm of government that also considerate, that take the welfare and the well-being of their citizens seriously, they may also consider the impact, which is what you're talking about here, the impact of these taxes, the tax changes on businesses, on citizens' welfare generally. But to answer your question, it is that payment that citizens mandatorily have to pay to government.
Now, that word mandated is the word a lot of people try to shy away from. But let's go a little bit further into the many hats that you wear specifically, especially in the public sector, dealing with revenue expansion and the like. What's the journey actually been like before you?
Well, for me, I do not discuss taxes per se. What I discuss, or what I have been focusing on, is subnational internally generated revenue expansion. My interest is slightly is a little bit broader, because there is, when you're talking about independent revenue generation, particularly for the second and third tiers of government, you are concerned. You will be looking at taxes and the non-tax revenue sources. So it's not entirely about tax. I also look, part of what the journey really is to, or part of what I do basically, is to look at how subnational governments, my focus on states and local government, how they can improve on their tax collections, and also how they can improve on their non-tax activities. I've been doing this for several states and several local governments in the past 10 years or more, and I have also been teaching that and working as a consultant to supporting development agencies on this area.
At this point, the only question can be, what is the landscape actually like? What is the truth of the situation when it comes to Nigeria? Is it effectively working? Are the policies working? How much have they evolved during the time that you've been there? How would you respond to that?
You know, I don't work for the public sector. I work for myself, so to say. I work for a think tank or an NGO that basically looks at how subnational governments can expand on their tax revenue or on non-tax revenues, generally independent revenue. However, a major flank of our concern is the impact, that is the connection between tax generation and citizens' well-being. So if we take that as a whole, that is basically what we can call IGR optimization, because it's not only about taxes, it's also about the fees and fines and levies and all those payments that you make to government, that to some extent you literally do not have a say in how they're determined. Even if you do, you know, the dispute resolution framework in Nigeria may not be able to even help your own case. So we look at all of that put together. To what extent has it supported the well-being of the citizens of Nigeria? And the blank answer is, it hasn't done very well in doing that. And I'll give you an example. We conducted a study a few months ago, and we found out that most subnational governments, that is the states, so to be specific, have been growing their internally generated revenue in the past 10 years by more than 30% on average. In fact, some have been growing at a much faster rate. So just take note of the rate of expansion. When I say growing here, the measure we used was average annual rate of growth. So of course, there are different other statistics you can use for that. Then we also looked at, that's a typical Nigerian case.
It is a typical Nigerian case. Go ahead.
We also looked at the share, you know, how much of the state GDP that these tax agencies, these states have been able to collect as revenue, internally generated revenue. And for most, it exceeded 1% or 1.2%. However, if you look at the rate of change in the well-being measured by the Human Development Index, it is, in fact, it is 0.03%. That means it's actually not shifting as states are growing the internally generated revenue at this very fast pace. If we also now look at poverty, we discover that even poverty is increasing as states are increasing these revenue receipts. So you can see the anomaly. Let me put it that way. Something that would not be theoretically expected. You would expect that as government rake in more revenue, that should pan out in the well-being of the citizens. But we do not see it here.
So you don't see it if you were to visualize it, if you were to put it on a graph and the sheet, the discrepancy is extremely wide. Go ahead.
Yes, the discrepancies, yes, is wide. And in fact, there are a lot of data to support it. And in fact, that's part of what we did. We have some data to support it. We've also published that in one of our reports we call the IGR Informer. But you can also see that very clearly out there. You keep wondering, what has government done with all the monies that they've been collecting in the past number of years?
Now, recently you put together an article on the issue of IGR, and you talked about it creating the same effect as a two-edged sword. Can you break that down for us?
Yes, ideally, you expect that tax receipts would result in improved good governance. like I've mentioned here, the more you receive, the more it manifests in high quality fiscal programs. And given, and I repeat that word, given accountability and transparency, you can build more trust and elevate citizens from the lower levels they are in terms of socioeconomic well-being to higher levels. Now, that isn't the case. So we expect on one hand taxes to do that, or revenue collection from government generally to do that, create well-being. But of course, we also know that it is an inconvenient payment. So it is inconveniencing to pay, particularly in an economy where you have 63% or more of the citizens by headcount ratio are multidimensionally poor. So you have more than 63% of people suffering all sorts of deprivation, and you add more of that deprivation by the taxes you impose upon them. Of course, like we said, it's a mandatory payment. So that is why we say it's a two-edged sword. One, it can help, or it should help, to create good governance and well-being. However, it can also increase the economic hardship that citizens in an economy that will have.
Now, I have to say, for the average business owner, this issue of taxation, and of course the statistics you've already started giving us a little by little, how does it affect business decisions? Because there are obviously some thriving businesses that could be doing better, and there are some that you probably see on the horizon might not last past the end of the year. What advice do you give business owners based on the political, or rather the taxation landscape that we find ourselves in?
Okay, let me put this first. Nigerians, well, there's something called compliance rates. Nigerians really are not, the compliance rate is quite low. However, for those who are paying or for those who are complying, it's almost like, since you have started complying, let us kill you. So you must comply to the letter. In that essay that you read, I won't mention the state. I presented a case of a new clinic, a clinic that just started 3 months into its entry. It was saddled with payments from states and local governments amounting to about close to 2 million naira. All sorts of payments, close to 2 million naira. And of course, more of those agencies would still keep coming. But this is actually counting how much, the size of what the clinic was mandated to pay within the first 3 months of being into existence. Now tell me, how would somebody who's borrowed money to set up that kind of clinic in a 3-bedroom apartment, how it would survive? Now, the issue is not about advice. The advice is not to the citizens or to the business people. The advice, first and foremost, because you're expected to pay, you're expected to comply, you're expected to, because taxes are laws. So if you do not comply, that means you're breaking laws. So the issue of the citizens not complying isn't the question. The question is, remember, there's one side of the sword, one edge of the sword, which is the good governance and the well-being of the citizens. If the government is interested in that, then one of the things it must prioritize is measuring the impact of changes in tax policies on the prosperity of its citizens. It must do that. If you do not measure how the taxes, how the changes in the rates, the changes in the tax, in the assets that you tax are, then you won't be able to.
How can we measure it? How can it be measured?
There are actually many ways of doing that. There are plenty of ways. But in the essay you read, I guess you read that, where I presented about 4. In fact, it should be like 5 if I'd broken it a little further down. The first one is to rely on published statistics. For instance, before now, the World Bank used to publish ease of doing business statistics at subnational level. So states could see things like payment of taxes, enforcement of contracts, and other indicators that would enable them to know whether these things they're doing, how it is panning out on the citizens. So if you are scoring low on a 10-point scale, for instance, Nigeria has been scoring about 10.37%. You've been scoring low on some of those parameters. That means you are not doing well. It means you are imposing unnecessary burden on your citizens because you are not, in the first instance, doing what you are supposed to do as a government in that regard. So it's one way of looking at it.
So is that,
but it may not.
Is it unique to Nigeria, or is this a problem that can be found in other countries around the world, do you think?
Well, I think in other countries, not in many countries actually. In fact, some developed countries are also guilty of this, measuring the impact of tax policies. So it's not about Nigeria, but it is of greater importance to the developing world, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, because of our peculiar circumstances. So if you are going to be collecting taxes from citizens, from a population where 63% of them are multidimensionally poor, wouldn't it make sense that you find out how much extra burden those changes or those policies are going to put on the table, how much extra burden is going to add? I mean, it's additional burden. So you need to know how many more people this are likely going to push further into poverty or not. So it might not be as imperative for countries that are doing very well as it would be for countries that are in our own particular kind of situation. Now, if I go back to there are other ways of measuring this, but to answer your question, it is, as a matter of fact, it's something that internal revenue services, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, they must prioritize this. And to date, they're not doing it. And you see, it partially explains why government does not, it partially explains some perceived insensitivity of government. Because if you are to provide me with good governance, and you know that this tax you are presenting has two-edged swords. One, of course, is that good governance. And I'm not seeing plenty of that. And then two, you are expanding at some rate that is more than 30% on growing this revenue. And we are about 63% in the room that are poor. Oh man, it is only important that you look at what that should, the kind of implication it will have on.
So at this point, what would the discussion be if we were in the room? How can the government cushion the effect for the average Nigerian?
You see, if you can measure it, you can control it. If you don't start checking how it impacts, how are you going to be designing policies about cushioning? It will be some kind of blind, daft policies. It's likely going to mismatch. So the most important thing is to measure it, to know how it is affecting, who is it affecting, what is the chain of the impact, what is the direction of this impact. And then it is on the basis of that information that you now begin to design remedies when it be, or some other kind of policies or strategies, or even retreats in the ones you've already put in place to ensure that the citizens have the benefit of the payments that they'll be making to the government in the form of taxes.
Okay, so there is the term evasion, but then there's also the term avoidance of certain taxes. Now, and I believe one of them is illegal and one of them not so much in this space. But for an average business owner who begins to understand the climate they're in, what advice do you have for them? How can they protect their businesses, or at least begin to cushion the effect on themselves?
Well, I think you have done a bit of the answering by bringing in the issue of evasion and avoidance, and by also clarifying the legality of each. Well, what you can avoidance should always be it, because you're finding smart ways of not running foul of government's laws, and also minimizing the taxes, the quantum of or the quantity of taxes you pay. However, what has happened with government not being sufficiently sensitive and measuring the impact of their policies is that the design and implementation of policies falls short of expectations. They mismatch, and eventually citizens don't have value for money, and they begin to evade taxes because they lose trust in the government. They believe government is insensitive, so they begin to more and more to evade taxes. Tax evasion is some kind of protest. You're protesting, and particularly for somebody who has been toughened, rendered poor by situations in the country. So a natural response would be to evade. However, because you also do not want to end up in the hands of law enforcement agencies, you now begin to look for tax experts, professionals, people who understand what are involved, who can read the language better, to help in designing programs for smarter levels of avoidance. So you can dodge what can be dodged without being considered to have broken the law. So that's basically how it is.
I'm thinking about so we did talk about obviously avoidance is possible, but then there does seem to be some kind of inequality. We've heard it many times that the richer some people are, the less tax they pay. Now, it might not be on the nose, the term might not be exactly correct, but there are some certain people above a particular line that might not be paying the taxes that one would expect them to be, based on some of the things that they've put in place, policies they put in place in their business. So why is there such an inequality in this particular space?
Well, let me say, you should know first and foremost that inequality also helps to strengthen the poverty level. But that's a discussion for another day. Even though I don't campaign along those lines. But to hit the nail on the head, on its head, they are the people you call HNIs, or the VIPs, high net worth individuals, or very important persons. Well, it's knowing the circumstances. If you're very conversant with Nigeria, I don't know where you live, but if you're very conversant with Nigeria, it would be difficult, for instance, for tax collectors to walk into the house of an Oba and say they want to collect taxes. Some people might consider it a taboo. They're going to Oba's house to collect taxes, or you're going to the house of the brother to the governor of a state to collect taxes, or even very, very, very powerful businessmen. Their gates may not even be open to you, so security men may not even allow you to come in. And two, such people might also have more complex ways of interconnecting their operations that you may not also be able to detect the flow of their incomes and earnings. So you may not even be able to tax it. So for the high net worth individuals and very important personalities and smart business people, they can find smart ways of making it difficult to pay. So they end up not paying what they should pay. And because they pay a high amount of money, high amount no matter what. For instance, they can end up paying 1% or 2% of their earnings. It still sounds big and it's huge to tax authorities. They may because of the challenges going further, they may end there at that point. Now, that is not the case with poor people, although it might also be challenging to collect taxes from the informal sector. And so some people, like you said, avoidance or evasion, hide under informality. So some businesses, for instance, that you do not need to because you know that if you register it, then tax authorities will start tracking you. You don't register them. So you operate using your personal account, your personal name, and do your trading and whatever. And that's basically what happens among many traders. Their businesses are not registered. So they just give a business name, which may not be registered anywhere. And they transact using their personal account. So now tell me how you're going to track that. But there are bare-faced poor people. You know, maybe petty traders, hawkers around the street, and there's some fixed rates that you impose upon them to pay. So regardless of whether your profit by the end of the day is about 1 naira or 2 naira, if that fixed pay is 50 kobo, you pay it. If it surpasses your profit, good luck to you. So then that goes to support what you're saying about the rich paying less and the poor paying more. Yes, of course, people at some level, they end up paying a greater proportion of their income than some people, particularly the very powerful ones. So that is also the irony here, and it's quite sad. VADES, there's something called VADES, which voluntary assessment for people in that category. I don't know how much of that worked, but one way to go about that is being more comprehensive with the enumeration of taxpayers and ensuring that databases are properly interlinked and interconnected to provide some intelligence, some extra intelligence to enable the tracking of the revenues or income of the wealthy or the powerful.
Can you hear me, Dr. Martin?
Yes, I hear you. I hear you now.
Oh, I think we got disconnected for a few minutes there, which is just one of the challenges we have when you're online in a place like Nigeria. We have actually gone quite deep into the conversation. Now, the article we're talking about earlier on is called Measuring the Impact of Tax Policy Changes on Businesses and Citizens. And the IGR initiative, you are the CEO of the IGR initiative. Let's take this time to talk a little bit about what you do as an NGO and how you're helping subnational governments optimize their independent revenue capabilities.
Yeah, in the IGR initiative, the focus is to support states and local governments with their IGR expansion. Basically, our interest is to help states and local governments with strategies for expansion, as well as ensuring that they build the trust that the citizens require to continue to comply. So you do not continue to expand without supporting citizens with the right kind of fiscal programs that supports their well-being, with sufficient levels of transparency and accountability that also make them to continue to comply. So that's in a nutshell what the focus is. Now, and how we have been able to go about this is through publications. Part of it is the essay you read. I maintain a column basically on states' finances with a leg. The leg basically is on IGR. We do fortnightly webinars and invite experts to help to support us with their ideas. Yes, of course. We also have a publication, a monthly publication, which is research-based. This is not research-based. This we try to just espouse the idea here. But we have one that involves research, which we call the IGR Informer. We go deep, collect data, analyze data, and get experts to help us with in-depth research. Recently, also, I published a 340-page book called The Ground Rules for Subnational IGR Expansion, which I recommend for all subnational governments in the African continent, because we have basically the same kind of challenges at subnational level. I'm not talking at country level. I'm not talking about at the country level. And we have also started what we call the IGR Varsity. And by mid-April, our programs will begin to be out there for people to be part of. So basically, that's what we have been doing. We are just about a year and 4 months old. And we're doing the best that we can to see if we can provide support, as much support. You see, the reason we are interested in this area is it's not just about helping states to earn more money. Because, ours is, if you get this money or if you get this income, what do you do with it? How do citizens benefit from it? And then citizens, if you benefit from it, why don't you live up to your responsibilities, contributing to the revenue of the government that is supporting you with some good quality governance?
I found the book you mentioned just now, and it says here, I'm not sure if you can see what I'm seeing now. You said underground.
Okay, no, that's not the book. That's not the book. Okay. This is actually just an essay.
Another essay.
The book is, the book is called The Ground Rules, not Underground. The Ground.
Oh, okay.
Yes, for subnational. It is in print. It is in print now, and we hope to make it available. It's online, Amazon? Actually.
Oh,
yes, it's in Amazon. It's in Amazon. It's in Amazon actually. But it's also in print. We have it in print. We are waiting for the new government to come in Nigeria. So we intend to give it free of charge to all chairpersons of Internal Revenue Service, and to all new governors, and to perhaps many local government chairpersons. So we've already printed them out. We're waiting for that time to come.
Okay, I think I found it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
So that's
right. So it's available on Amazon now.
Yes.
For some reason, my Amazon is in yen. I'm not sure how to get it into Naira at this point, but at least you can find it on Amazon if you would like to pick up a copy of the book. I have to say thank you to you, Dr. Ike-Muonso, for having a conversation with us today. You're highly appreciated. Even though the electricity seemed to go out for a bit, hopefully you're able to sort that out before you get to your next meeting. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity.
All right then. Now the conversation continues online. If you have any comments, contributions, or questions for Dr. Ike-Muonso, you can of course use the comment section on the platform you are watching or listening to us from, and we'll see what we can do to respond to your questions. And please, Doc, if we have any more questions, I hope you'll come back.
Absolutely. This is an area that I live my entire life on. So if you call me anytime, I'll be available for.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martin. Now, it's a conversation that I did say is ongoing, and one that probably might not end anytime soon. It's one of those conversations that needs to be had, and it's a conversation starter in your office, in your environment, wherever you are, especially if you're planning to start a small business of your own. Have you considered the impact of tax and taxation on your small business as soon as you get it registered? Have you considered the system, whether it's efficient, whether it's fair enough for the particular field you'd like to go into? Now, there are people that can help. There are advisors you can speak to, listen to. There are mentors online. There are people like Dr. Ike-Muonso who are doing what they can to help the little guy. And now Dr. Martin helped us talk a little bit about the influence of taxation on our business decisions and how government spending and taxation policies have been affecting the profitability of the average citizen and, of course, their welfare. And hopefully this conversation starter is one that will make you have 1 or 2 extra meetings in your company, in your office, in your boardroom, towards how you can either take advantage or not be abused by some of the policies that might just be hitting your industry today. All right, then, until next time, thanks for watching.